they said, we can't provide you with microfilms of the material you want, but if you come on a day when the museum is officially closed, we will let you take pictures. And so I had a Russian friend who was a cinematographer. He had a movie camera that ran 35 millimeter, kind of a shoulder pack camera. And so on the windowsill, I was able to sit and single frame musical scores that they allowed me. Then they developed the films for me, and I was actually able to bring them out through customs. Of course, it's not so much customs that they're looking for; it's the border guards are just there to harass people. So he and I spent several days in the Glinka Museum, basically single framing musical scores, including the Kostayski. But all in all, through those two trips, I was able to collect a pretty complete, comprehensive collection of Russian sacred choral literature.
I'm publishing this podcast in partnership with the Orthodox Arts Journal and New World Byzantine. The Orthodox Arts Journal is an online resource where you can find articles about Orthodox iconography, architecture, and music from some of the foremost pioneers in the field, such as Aidan Hart, Vladimir Morosan, and Jonathan Peugeot. New World Byzantine is the architectural design firm run by Andrew Gould, who in my estimation is the foremost Orthodox architectural designer in North and South America, bringing together a marriage of American design and traditional Orthodox building arts.
We had to stop talking the other day, but I'm glad that we could come back and talk again. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, because you were talking the other day, and you kind of went into the fact that you were in Russia for a while, but we didn't talk that much about it. I was talking to someone else about you, and she said, "Oh yeah, when he was in like his 20s and 30s, he basically had all these clandestine operations where he went and did these photographs in these secret dark archives totally illegally, and then smuggled all of these choral manuscripts out of the Soviet Union and published them in the United States," which you talked about, about the Kostowski Requiem, but is that a little hyperbolic, or is that tell me more. How was all of that?
Yeah. It's a little hyperbolic, enhanced for uh,
Hollywood version.
Right, exactly. Well, the real story is that when I graduated from Occidental College, by that time I had been totally smitten by choral music and decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to being a choral conductor and a musicologist. And around that time is when the first recordings of Russian liturgical music became available in the West, recorded in Russia. There had been other recordings, obviously, that were made by choirs in the West, but they were usually amateur choirs and nothing on the high professional level. So all of a sudden, these recordings arrive and become available. And I later found out you couldn't buy them in Russia. You couldn't buy them in the Soviet Union. You could only buy them. They would manufacture them specifically for sale to tourists in the special currency shops that they had in the Soviet Union, and also ship them abroad. So people could listen to this beautiful sacred music and conclude, hey, there's no real persecution of religion or the church in Russia, in the Soviet Union. So it was a kind of a propaganda tool. But be that as it may, um, the music on there was very uh, well done, well recorded, and featured some music that literally had never been recorded or heard anywhere in the West or in the Soviet Union or anywhere. So, and around that time, also a couple of books dealing with it was called the Early Russian Art of Chant by Nikolai Uspensky, and anthologies of chant transcriptions. For the very first time, they were being published, and again, in very limited press runs, for a very limited audience, but at least though they were available to people who were following that. And so
is that the same Uspensky as the iconographer?
No, no. Same. It's a very common. It's a very common surname. No, this Uspensky was a professor at the Leningrad Theological Academy, which was one of the few
Okay.
seminaries that operated in the Soviet Union. So I had the opportunity to apply for a very unusual and kind of generous for its time travel fellowship from the Thomas Watson Foundation, which gave me some of money to travel for a year abroad, doing whatever I had applied for. And my application was to study early Russian Orthodox liturgical music and Orthodox music in general. Yeah, it was it's almost like a fairy tale. You get your wish, and as this starry-eyed recent college graduate, so I traveled to in Europe extensively. I met with all the famous names that there was a musicologist in Germany by the name of Johann von Gardner, or Ivan Alexeyevich Gardner. He was actually Russian, but had an English name
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard the
going back.
name. I don't know his
Yeah.
stuff, but I've heard the name.
Well, he was a musicologist who, in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, basically was the sole torchbearer of Russian liturgical musicology, certainly in the West, because his counterparts in the Soviet Union were simply, as we mentioned earlier, were not allowed, and certainly were not encouraged to study liturgical music or early chant or anything like that, early polyphony. So he was the only one. He lived in Munich, which was the city of my birth. So I happened to travel there and met with him several times. Then I also spent 6 months in Paris singing in the cathedral choir of St. Alexander Nevsky Cathedral under
Really?
Yevgeny Yevbitz, who was one
The
of
only
the.
place that I've been kicked out of an Orthodox church.
What did you do?
It was a while ago. This was years ago. I was on vacation. I was in Paris. It was 100 degrees outside. I mean, so I was wearing like shorts,
Yeah.
but no, I didn't think much about it because, like I said, it was 100 degrees outside. It was ridiculously hot. And then I realized, oh, I'm like 3 blocks from the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral. I should go to Vespers, then I could see the cathedral. Well, I went in and they were not so happy that I was not wearing pants and that my wife was not wearing a dress. And they said, you must not be in here. And just kicked me
Yeah.
out. And I was like, man, where's the love of Christ? Where's the
Right.
hospitality? Where's
Right.
it was a little upsetting, but whatever.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
I've been told
in
that's
in
very
Russia now
Russian.
that in Russia now they would have supplied, certainly your wife, they would have supplied with a makeshift skirt that looks like it's made out of burlap, And
Yes.
particularly in the Kiev caves, lava, they had it was the color was something like lime green, like this, and they had these skirts, for a whole pile of them, for women who were not appropriately attired. But men wearing shorts and flip-flops, that would have been a problem.
Hey, hit that like button.
So
Fair enough. I don't think I had, flip-flops. It was just really hot. I'm not gonna walk
yeah,
around from like 8 in the
right. Oh,
morning
I
with
didn't.
like jeans
Right.
on when it's 100 degrees
Yeah.
outside. It's like
Well,
whatever.
what's funny is it was probably very cool and comfortable inside the cathedral.
I felt great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So anyway,
it's
you
so
were at the
anyway. So
Alexander Nevsky Cathedral.
yeah, I spent 6 months there singing and in the choir, like every service, and learned a lot. Learned a lot. Yevgeny Yevbitz is one of the really major figures of the 20th century in the choral field. And the way his career was, if he had stayed in the Soviet Union, well, who knows what would have happened? But artistically, he would have probably been, people's artist or whatever those honorarian titles that they bestow on people, hero of socialist labor or something like that. But
Mm.
which is kind of funny for a musician. But yeah, or the Lenin, the Lenin Medal or Order of Lenin or something like that. But the way his career turned out, he grew up in Poland right at the time when Poland was being kind of uh, tossed back and forth between Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. So he went westward and ended up in Morocco, of all places, in Casablanca, where there was a community of Russian Orthodox exiles. And he had, I think, we're just about to publish an article about that in this new journal that is going to be coming out called Orthodox Church Music. There's been a first historical study of Yevbitz and his choir and his activity in Casablanca, and then later in Paris. So from Casablanca, he moved to Paris. In Paris, he lived out the rest of his life and made several excellent recordings, including one with Nikolai Gedda as the soloist, famous tenor. So for me, it was as a young recent college grad and just a beginning conductor, it was a real interesting school, almost like an apprenticeship. Although I didn't actually get to do any conducting, but to watch and to listen and how he did that and the kind of things that they sang, the way they sang it. Well, around those those experiences in Munich and Paris, also went to the Holy Mountain for a while and traveled around Greece. Um, kind of sandwiched. That was all sandwiched between two trips to Russia. And during those trips to Russia, I keep saying Russia, it was the Soviet Union in those days. Um, I also met Nikolai Uspensky and Maxim Brajnikov, who was the other chant scholar that was gradually being allowed in his old age to emerge from the shadows and publish a few of these chant studies. So that was very enlightening, and I started my music collecting activities for the first in both in Paris and in Russia. In the Soviet Union, they allowed me to sit on a windowsill at the Leningrad Theological Academy. Very big windowsill. You can imagine these walls were several feet thick. And so on the windowsill, I was able to sit and single frame musical scores that they allowed me. Then they developed the films for me, and I was actually able to bring them out uh, through customs. Of course, it's not so much customs that they're looking for; it's the border guards are just there to harass people, and so that was my first trip to Russia, and then later on, as part of my graduate, my dissertation research, I received a Fulbright uh, fellowship under the IREX International Research and Exchange Program that the State Department was running at the time, maybe still is, I don't know. And I was able to spend 6 months in Moscow and basically, again, doing research in libraries, in musical archives. The Glinka Museum of Musical Culture, as it is known, has all the archives of the famous composers, Kostyarsky and Chesnikov and Gretchaninov and other composers who wrote church music. And I had very generous microfilming privileges. In other words, I could submit uh, material to be microfilmed, and because I was an American exchange student, there was no question of allowing this or not allowing this. If my Russian counterpart had walked in and requested the same material, they would have probably been denied. But
Really?
as it happened, I was a favored person in that context, and the filming. Ironically, at that time, though, the Glinka Museum had no microfilming facilities. So if you wanted to photograph or microfilm something, and microfilm just simply, we use a 35 millimeter black and white film. That's that kind of standard. It's not like we were using some sort of spyware or something like that. Hidden camera with little, concealed in your, tie pin or something like that. Um, it's just simply meant they said, well, we can't provide you with microfilms of the material you want. But if you come on a day when the museum is officially closed, we will let you take pictures. And so I had a Russian friend who was a cinematographer. He was a camera. He had a movie camera that ran 35 millimeter, kind of a shoulder pack camera. And so he and I spent several days in the Glinka Museum, basically single framing musical scores, including the Kostyarsky. And they weren't particularly concerned about what I was filming or what I wasn't filming. And that's how the the enhanced Hollywood script got its start, because I was able to bring some things that had never really seen the light of day. And I'm sure there were other things. They don't actually let you into the archive material itself. You have to request specific things, so you have to rely on the card file that on the catalog and request specific things. If you don't know something's there or it didn't get cataloged properly, you didn't know to request it, so you never saw it. But all in all, through those two trips, I was able to collect a pretty complete, comprehensive collection of Russian choral literature, sacred choral literature, and some secular as well, some part songs and things like that, from that whole era of the 19th century, early 20th century, uh, and the whole point being that these were uh, very reliable sources compared to things that emigre refugees who had to leave with the shirt on their backs, or in some cases had lost their entire libraries during the war through some, artillery shell exploding, uh, you know, and in their apartment or something like that. I know of several cases like that. Professor Gardner was one who lost his entire music collection because he was in Berlin when the Allies were bombing Berlin, and so they were in the bomb shelters, but the structures up above were totally destroyed, and all of his manuscripts and music and everything was destroyed. So he had to basically start from scratch. But I heard stories again that people are sitting around the camp stove in a barracks in a DP camp, displaced persons camp, and there were several choir directors huddled together, by the heat of this stove, and some big feast was coming up, and would sit there and by heart, by memory, would write out choir parts for the coming service. Well, how do you remember this going? How does the tenor part go? How does the bass part go? And they would write these on little scraps of paper, in pencil. They would write these things out, and then the community would gather in the barracks and have a church service. And some of those, I mean, as heroic as that sounds, that's not exactly necessarily an accurate rendition of how this particular piece of music went. So it was very important to me to collect actual printed scores, so that they had some authenticity, at least in that regard. And most of these were published under the supervision of the composer in the composer's lifetime. So, and there are a few typos here and there, but basically it's reliable material. And later on, when I established Musica Russica, a publishing company, this was the basis for our editions of Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and Grachaninov and all the other music that we've published since that time. And as I think I mentioned last time we spoke, the big innovation in our editions was that we supplied phonetic transliteration of the Slavonic texts, rather than just the Cyrillic. So that made it accessible to choirs here in outside of Russia to sing this music, and they do sing it, and usually these are the kinds of reports that we get. I tried programming one of your pieces this year, by such and such by Gretchenino, and now my whole choir and the audience want to know, what are we going to sing this next season from that same repertoire? It's just repertoire that seems to win the hearts of both the singers and the audience, and of course, conductors and teachers, high school teachers. They take these pieces to festivals, they to all states, and we've had choirs record from our scores and get Grammy nominations or Grammy awards. So it's been a very rewarding kind of activity to put this music on on the map, so to speak, because when I was just first starting out, when I was in college, I went, living in LA, I went to the UCLA and USC and the LA Public Library, looking for scores. And there were some scores that were produced back in the 1920s and 30s but they were English adaptations to like Anglican anthems, primarily. There was a choir master in New York by the name of Lindsay Norden, and he adapted a lot of Russian literature for as use as anthems.
Right. I've seen some of those. In fact, I have some of those in my library here.
Every conductor, choral conductor, has some of those things. And if you look at the copyright, it's like 1920, or 1925 or something like that. And there's some question as to how copyrightable those pieces were, because the composers were still very much alive and in the Soviet Union, behind that iron curtain that had descended. So, but anyway, these days it seems that conductors are taught and trained to perform in the original language if possible, and so our editions have been very well received and often performed. And
Some
then,
of them even the only ones, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that we've kind of revealed, as it were, to the world. One notable example. Well, we talked about the Costaiski Requiem. The other one was Maximilian Steinberg's Passion Week, which is a remarkable story. Steinberg was originally Jewish. He married Rimsky-Korsakov's daughter, and in the process, in order to get married in the Orthodox Church, he converted to Russian Orthodoxy. Plus, he studied under his father-in-law, Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who also had a real interest in chant. And Steinberg learned a lot about Znameni chant and those other chants that we talked about from Rimsky-Korsakov. So when Rimsky-Korsakov died, Steinberg became eventually assumed his chair of musicology at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. And in the 1920s, early 1920s, when the Civil War was still going on, the Bolsheviks had just kicked everybody out of power. Lenin was already had begun his campaign of terror against the Russian Orthodox Church. Steinberg writes this Passion Week, a setting of the hymns, a kind of an anthology of hymns from Holy Week, somewhat similar to what Grichaninov had written in 1912, but not identical. And whereas Grichaninov only used he used chant in a few selective movements. Steinberg's practically his entire cycle is based on Znameni and some of the other chants. This piece was published in 1928 in France. Somehow Steinberg, before Stalin took over, there was some limited opportunities for people to travel abroad, and somehow Steinberg had they let him travel to France. He had this score published, but there was never a single performance of this piece until 2016, I want to say. I think it's 2016.
Wow.
And the first performance of it was done by Capella Romana in Portland and Seattle. And then a few weeks later, Stephen Fox and Clarion Choir in New York City gave the East Coast premiere of Steinberg's Passion Week. And then a year or so down the road, I had the great privilege and pleasure of traveling with Clarion Choir to Russia, and we performed the piece in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And that was the first time the Russians had ever heard this piece. It had been written in 1921. So these are some of these adventures in musicology, and then we published the score, so it's available through Musica Russica again with phonetics and all that. The edition of 28 was very, very obscure, very hard to even get one's hands on it. And then lately, last 5 years or so, what I have done is I decided that we published, we have about close to 1,000 titles in our catalog, but there's still quite a lot of material that isn't published. So I decided that rather than having this stuff sit in my file cabinets, that I should make it available. And so we have this online internet project called the Orthodox Sacred Music Reference Library. And it basically scans PDF files of all those pieces that I took pictures of sitting on the windowsill, all the pieces that were single framed by my friend, the cameraman in the Glinka Museum. Just it's over 3,000 pages. No, forgive me. It's not. It's 3,000 titles, and growing all the time.
Wow.
That's still a project in progress, and so we're putting the scores there, and we're also putting hundreds and hundreds of articles and books and monographs that about church singing, about choral singing. That this is the stuff that I had to get fellowships and travel to Russia to get, and this way now it's all available online. So there's like I say, there's hundreds. Probably be by the time we're finished, there will be several thousand titles. Um, there's a bibliography behind it that numbers, I think, last I checked, in about 9,000 titles. And we're putting up links more as more and more material becomes available. Some of it's been scanned through. Some of it's like on the Wayback Machine. So we're putting links were available. We're putting PDF printouts from microfilms were available, digitized versions. So hopefully this will keep the next few generations of interested musicians and scholars informed and engaged in this area, because there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and just legacy that was lost through the 75 years or so of communism in Russia and surrounding areas. We had mentioned that, although there's a lot of composers now writing sacred music for the church, there's a clear sense that people ask, well, what is, they sing Rachmaninoff's All Night Vigil, and I say, well, what else is there? Well, when Steinberg's Passion Week came along, you could say, well, there's Steinberg's Passion Week. If you liked Rachmaninoff, you will like Steinberg, but he's not exactly a household name in musical circles, and the music is fabulous. It's extraordinarily beautiful. But there hasn't been any kind of what we could say, someone's continued that tradition, that legacy of those composers. There's still lots of lost time and lost experience that needs to be somehow recaptured. I had an interesting conversation with my advisor. Had an academic advisor in Moscow at the conservatory. I was the first American to go as an exchange student to the conservatory specifically. Most other exchange scholars went to the universities, Moscow or Leningrad or whatever. But I went to the Moscow Conservatory, and so Klavdiy Borisovich Ptitsa, a wonderful name for a choral conductor, Ptitsa meaning bird. So he's like Professor Bird, who was actually an Orthodox believer secretly. He didn't advertise the fact in the conservatory halls, but he was a believer, and he was a student of Chesnikov and Nikolsky and some of he knew all those great conductors from who died in the 1940s primarily, but he still knew them from his student days. And one time he was in a kind of a thoughtful moment. He said, Vladimir Petrovich, he addressed me in the formal Russian way, name and patronymic. Vladimir Petrovich, you understand, we are not able to perform any of the great works of sacred music in our country. So I give you a charge. Take all the music you can, collect it all, take it to the West, and teach them how to sing it. so that this heritage is not lost forever. I mean, when I tell that story, it just kind of, sends goosebumps up my back still. It was a very, very serious and heartfelt wish and desire, that I hope that through activities of Musica Russica and the Orthodox Choral Heritage Foundation, which is the umbrella for the Sacred Music Reference Library, I hope that we've fulfilled Professor Ptitsa's instructions to us.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said you have a journal that you're coming out with, the Orthodox Church
Yeah.
Music Journal?
Orthodox Church Music. Yeah, it's just about ready to go to press. So the idea is to have a semi-annual journal, and it'll have some articles about recent past, present, and future topics specifically of interest to Orthodox Church musicians and people who are like yourself, who are interested in the field, even though you're working in another realm.
Mhm.
Probably because it's very difficult to be an Orthodox musician and to support a family on what the
Indeed.
the huge stipends that people are paid for that work. Yeah, we just haven't quite reached that level of maturity in this country yet.
Yeah, it's funny how I think they should pay for iconography. That's great.
Right,
But it's like, pay for a choir director. Why would we pay for a choir director?
right,
It's like, the Matushka can direct. We'll just let her
right.
do it.
Yes, yes.
Like, yes, with her 2 years of choir and her bachelor's or whatever. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Yeah, so there's definitely work to be done. Uh,
Yeah, will your journal be pan-Orthodox
yes,
or like just Eastern? Like, would you do stuff with Oriental Orthodox?
yeah. In principle, it's pan-Orthodox. Absolutely. There's a little preview of it. It's going to be available in digital and print form. So if you go to Orthodox Psalm,
Okay.
orthodox-psalm.org, you can check it out and subscribe.
Yeah, there's a guy named Gabriel, and this guy's probably the foremost expert on Syriac chant in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he for sure would be the guy that, I would say you should try to get this guy to write for, even though it's
Right,
Oriental Orthodox.
right.
You were talking about these recordings, which were, what were you saying? These recordings that were almost gone, almost lost.
Mm-hmm.
All of these manuscripts and stuff that were lost during World War II. Well,
Right.
supposedly he has a full copy. Like, the only time that the entire Beth Gazo, according to the Edessan chant tradition, was ever recorded, it fits on like 60 CDs, and these like two priests sang through their entire corpus of hymnody, and one musicologist had a recording and made a copy and gave the other copy to him, and then subsequently lost his own copy. And
Hmm.
so I'm like,
Wow.
what are you doing, Gabriel? And he's like,
Yeah,
yeah, there's only
yeah,
one copy of the
yeah,
entire
yeah,
Beth Gazo, and nobody
yeah,
knows it anymore because they've all been bombed in Syria, and it's
yeah,
just, on the brink of being lost to
yeah.
history. But that you need someone like him who speaks Syriac and knows liturgical Aramaic, or liturgical, like, he knows all of the dialects and whatnot, and he's a chant expert, so he can say, "Oh, this is actually from Turkey. This
Mm-hmm.
is not the Edessan version. This is from the Mosul school," and he would have to catalog it, but it would be like a year of full-time work just to be able to catalog this one series of recordings of the Syriac chant, and so
Right, right.
it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and there's an interesting kind of sometimes a disconnect between those who practice actually sing chants in churches and then the scholars who study it. Sometimes that certainly became a trend in the Soviet Union and the post-Soviet Union, that a lot of the scholars, they found very useful ground for writing papers and doing studies. But some of these folks, didn't know their way around a church service, like they really didn't know, because they didn't go to church, because it was not
Right.
advantageous for them, and certainly not in the Soviet days, to be present as a believer. So there is this kind of bit of disconnect, and traditionally, I think it goes back to the difference between a musicologist and a performer, or a music theorist and a composer and a performer. It's something that we have somewhat addressed in our educational institutions, with things like the DMA program, the Doctor of Musical Arts. Well, that's a performance-oriented doctoral level degree, and that's what I happen to have, for example. But
that's what I have as well.
Yeah, that's what. But even in Russia before the revolution, speaking of all those articles that we have online now, there was a real debate as to what type of training was required for a choir master or a chanter. It was very much in the realm of the practical, kind of an apprenticeship. You learn, but the scholars who study the music are kind of a different category of people. So and should clergy, for example, be trained in music in some fashion, in some practical way?
Well, especially in a tradition where they sing everything, it would probably be advantageous, I would assume.
From a from a musical standpoint, for sure. But the conservatories in those days, in old Russia, you graduated from conservatory as with something called a free artist. That was your degree, as it were, a free artist, and presumably you were then free to find employment or starve to death, whatever. It didn't necessarily give you any kind of employment privileges. So it's still a debate that continues to this day, as to exactly what, for example, does one go to seminary to learn to be a church musician, or does one go to a conservatory or a school of music? And we in the Orthodox sphere don't have that answer yet at all, because the seminaries, as a rule, don't teach music, except for perhaps a course here or there, kind of an introductory course for seminarians. And of course, there is no equivalent of, well, even like the Westminster Choir College, which was originally started as a school for church choir directors, Presbyterian choir directors, I think. It is interesting that a friend of mine who worked in the development office at Westminster Choir College said one day an alum brought in an old postcard with a picture of that one main building of Westminster, and on the back the inscription was printed on the back. It said, Westminster Choir College, established by John Finley Williamson for the preservation of the great a cappella Russian tradition. Like, what, really? That's pretty amazing. Yeah. But it's there. It was printed right on the postcard. So there was quite a bit of, I think, interchange, more than we realize, between the Russian choral school and the American, what we know now as, what was known as the a cappella movement, and back in the early years of the 20th century. And of course, we have a very well-developed choral tradition in this country, at least for a while. We don't know where it's headed now, but there
Right.
are lots of
Yeah, it's a problem. Like my friend Olympia, she wanted to study church music. So she went to St. Tikhon's and got a master's in theology. And
Mhm.
she's like the second woman to ever do that. But there
Right,
was no church music degree. And if she got church music somewhere else, it would have had almost zero practical application for doing an
right,
Orthodox church service,
right.
you know? And
Yeah,
so it's kind of
yeah,
at least for the Orthodox, it's not a great infrastructure.
yeah. There, right. It's very much in its infancy, if we can even say. It may not,
Right.
there might
And
not
why
have
get a
even been
degree
a
in it if there's no
yeah.
job to have in it, you know?
Right. Who's going to go into that field as a vocation if there are no jobs, no real training. So it's a little ironic that we have the oldest kind of continuous liturgical tradition going back millennia and no real training that goes along with that.
Well, it's difficult, I think, partially because it's so voice driven,
Yes.
because everyone thinks, oh, I can sing. Everybody sings. You're just having people sing. Whereas at least, in Anglican world, well, not everyone can play the organ. The
Right.
organ, you have to spend a lot of hours to get even a little bit technically proficient. So it's
Right.
just like prima facie, like apparent
Yeah.
that it's a skill set. So you have to pay for the skill set. But
Right.
if you think, oh, I can sing, you can sing, everybody can
Yeah.
sing, we just need somebody up there to just wave their arms and
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
sure that, we come in at the same time. And they don't realize, like, oh, actually, you need to really know the services and
Yeah.
you need to
Yeah.
be able to hear balance and you need to understand vocal technique and you need to be able to communicate effectively with very little motion. And it's like there is a
Yeah.
skill set that's a little less apparent.
Yes. Yes. You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what other things in the catalog, um, like the Passion Week or the Kostowski Requiem, might people not know about that you would say? I mean, are there 3 or 4 other pieces you'd say, "Hey, go on our catalog and check these out because these are really
Yes.
jewels that should be known that people haven't recorded."
Yes. Yes. Well, uh, of course, the name Gritchaninov comes to mind. He was a very prolific composer of all kinds of music, and he wrote four settings of the liturgy. He wrote the Passion Week, which we already mentioned, and he also wrote an all-night vigil, which was before Rachmaninoff. Uh, quite a lovely piece of music that should be known. Um, the composer Nikolai Cherepnin uh, also
Okay, is that like
wrote a couple of letters. Yeah, yeah,
Tcherepinen, something like that?
yes. But there was three generations of Cherepnins who were musicians. So Nikolai was the sort of the patriarch of the family who emigrated during the revolution to France. Um, and wrote some lovely choral music both before and after his departure from Russia. And then his son Alexander Cherepnin was more of a modernist composer, and I think the grandson Ivan Cherepnin was an electronic. He was into electronic music. Uh, I think he studied in somewhere in Boston. I'm not sure if it was the New England Conservatory or somewhere else in Boston. But so you have these three generations. And Alexander Cherepnin wrote a few choral pieces, but nothing of real significance for the Orthodox Church. But his father Nikolai, who died in 1945, I believe, has some lovely music, and it's never been recorded. Um,
Wow.
Viktor Kalinnikov is another name that comes up. He's the name, there's a kind of a confusion because he had a brother, Vasily Kalinikov. So V. Kalinikov, people get the two brothers mixed up. But Vasily Kalinikov wrote 2 symphonies and died at a young age, in his 30s. And Victor was the choral composer, but who was associated with the Moscow, that whole group of Moscow synodal school musicians. And then there's
Victor is the one.
Yes, Victor is the choral composer. Yeah, and
Okay.
he never
Tenebrae
wrote
did their
yeah, yes. Um, we also we need to mention Nikolai Golovanov, who is another. He actually started out as an assistant choir master at the synodal school, but after the revolution became a conductor at the Bolshoi Theater, and again wrote a lot of music into the drawer. A lot of continue to write sacred choral music, but it wasn't published until recently, actually, recently in Russia. So that music, the part of his output that was published is available through the Orthodox Choral, Sacred Choral Reference Library. But then there's a reference to the volume of his collected works that was published in Russia, and it's possible to buy it. It's a little difficult right now because of the sanctions, and it's difficult to make credit card purchases in Russia because they can't process Western credit cards. But the music is, definitely deserves to be looked at. A lot of these composers didn't write like a vigil or a liturgy, but they wrote a lot of individual titles, and you can put composite. You can build like composite services from all their individual. They may have written 10 cherubic hymns and 10 settings of the anaphora of the Eucharist and other hymns, and you kind of assemble them from all the individual titles. That's for the benefit of a major concert, major performance.
Do y'all publish any of Roman Hurko stuff?
Yeah, well, we have Roman Hurko's Vespers. Yeah, we have that published, and he also has written three settings of the liturgy, which he publishes. They're available from him.
Okay.
And I think
what do you think of his stuff, if you don't mind my asking?
Oh, I love his writing. It's very nice, very very lovely. Then he also has the Requiem for the victims of Chernobyl. Which is
that's a pretty interesting piece.
Setting of the Requiem.
Would he be sort of a continuation of the Russian choral tradition, or is he not quite Russian choral tradition? Is he too idiosyncratic?
I don't know. I think his I don't know how to characterize his style. It's certainly not modern in the modernist sense. It's very tonal, very consonant. He is probably, he's very solidly in the Ukrainian realm, Ukrainian Byzantine Catholic. So that music, that's another whole area. There were composers in Ukraine around the time of the revolution who wrote music. Leontovich comes to mind, whom everybody knows through the Carol of the Bells, but he also wrote liturgical pieces. Then there's a composer by the name of Kirill Stetsenko, who also wrote liturgical music, and a lot of emigres who ended up in places like Canada and in the Great Plains of Canada, and little Ukrainian kind of village churches that wrote wrote some significant choral music, and that still remains to be explored. And Roman, I
Okay,
think,
interesting.
yeah, Roman is, well, I know that he is extremely, I mean, he's certainly aware, very much aware of the Orthodox choral literature, and I think but he's not trying to, like any composer, he's trying to find his own voice, create music that has kind of, maybe one foot in both realms. And of course, the picture wouldn't be complete without mentioning uh, people like Kurt Sander and Benedict Sheehan,
Mm-hmm.
who write. They're 21st century composers, but I think in the case of Kurt Sander's liturgy, for example, uh, is very, very much informed by the liturgical cycles of Grachaninov and Rachmaninoff, even going back to Tchaikovsky. But of course, Kurt Sander has his own voice and his own way, extremely skillful way of dealing with thematic material, and his liturgy has this marvelous kind of leitmotivic um, uh, aspects to it that go through the entire piece and evolve and develop. Um, and I think the same can be said for Benedict Sheehan too. Very much draw very much upon chant heritage and those choral composers who drew on it and so on.
Sure. Very thick music. Very not practical for a regular church choir. But I guess
Some,
Chestakov isn't it, generally
yeah,
speaking, and neither is Rachmaninoff, and
yeah,
everyone
yeah,
wants to. This is the part of the frustrating thing, almost about like, I mean, it's not just in music. I guess it would be in multiple art forms, but especially with like liturgical music. It's a little bit less so in the Anglican world, but everyone wants to write the big things,
hmm
you know? But if you write the little things,
yeah,
everyone will do it. Just
yeah,
write something exquisite and not that complicated.
right.
And you can
It
sell a
takes,
ton.
yeah, and it takes a great composer to be able to do that and not compromise, the artistic content.
There needs to be a John Rutter of the Orthodox church music world,
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, in my mind, no one has emerged thus far who, certainly I'm talking about Russia now, whom one could. I mean, there are people who have written a lot, but it's not necessarily music that captures the imagination and the heart as much as some of the earlier works, early 20th century works.
Do you mind if I go back and ask you a few questions about some of the composers we were talking about?
Sure.
You were talking about Tchaikovsky, and we were just getting into Tchaikovsky, I think, before we had to go the last time. It was fascinating to me that you were saying they just totally destroyed his Divine Liturgy, hated it, put it in piles and put the piles on fire. And then after that, he still wanted to write an all-night vigil.
Right.
And so if I'm remembering correctly, so he was one of the first ones that was primarily responsible for the renewed interest and preservation of Znameny chant, and then it was his student Kostalski who then sort of took that project to the next level. Is that a
hmm
accurate rendering of what we were
Yes.
talking about on Monday?
Yes, I think so. Um, yeah, one has to realize also that there was this system of censorship in Imperial Russia, where for various reasons, not necessarily important to go into, but there was, if you wrote a piece of sacred music and you want it published, you needed to get the approval of the director of the Imperial Chapel. Right up until the whole story with Tchaikovsky's liturgy, that director was a man by the name of Nikolai Bakhmetyev, who, among other things, is known as we were talking about the obihod, that kind
Right.
of
Yeah, I have a
very
few
simple
clarifying questions on that too.
chant. And so Bakhmechev was probably like the definition, the very personification of conservatism in this field. And so under his rather long administration, there were very few pieces that were actually added to the repertoire. Well, around I want to say 1882, 1883, there was a change of monarch. Alexander II, who freed the serfs and was a great reformer, was assassinated by a terrorist bomb, and his father Alexander became the third, Alexander the Third. And at that time, well, it's kind of like here, you get a new administration, they clean house, they dismiss the old cabinet members, they bring in new cabinet members. So this was the case there, that with the enthronement of Alexander the Third, um, Mili Balakirev became the director of the Imperial Chapel, and
Is this the guy
Balakirev,
who did is it Islame for
yes,
the piano?
yes,
Okay.
right, the ostensible founder of what's called the Mighty Five, and Balakirev, Rimsky-Korsakov, Borodin, Kui, and Mussorgsky. And so Balakirev brought his friend Rimsky-Korsakov to be his assistant in the Imperial Chapel and set him to write church music. That was kind of like part of his assignment, was to write church music. Balakirev wrote very little church music. Rimsky-Korsakov wrote, a fair amount, 40, 45 pieces. And in a very kind of studied, simple style. This is we were talking about writing simple. So Rimsky-Korsakov wrote this Lord's Prayer that is just a few simple chords, but every church, and I mean, I can tell you, like all across America, that's what's sung on a typical Sunday morning. They'll sing Rimsky-Korsakov's Lord's Prayer.
Even more than the Kedrov.
Much more than the Kedrov. There's a Kedrov.
Wow.
The Kedrov is a kind of it has some tricky harmonies there, and it's kind of a mood piece, But Rimsky-Korsakov is very much wrote very deliberately in the style of, this is what a typical parish anywhere, it could be a small town, it could be even a village, that this is accessible to them. And he wrote similar other settings of other hymns in that same style. So under Rimsky-Korsakov now and Balakirev, it became much simpler to write a piece of music and get it approved by the censor, by the director of the Imperial Chapel. And that is what started this great this wave of music, because before that, composers, even like Mussorgsky, he never wrote a single piece, or Borodin, he never wrote a note of church music, because he knew that he would have to submit it to some bureaucrat in St. Petersburg who's known to be a kind of a musical curmudgeon, and who wants to do that if you're a composer? But after Balakirev and Rimsky-Korsakov, the whole atmosphere became much more favorable. And in fact, somewhere there's something that there's a record of the fact that the Tsar Alexander, the new Tsar, actually went on record encouraging Tchaikovsky, as a famous Russian composer, said, well, we hope, Mr. Tchaikovsky, you will continue to write church music and enrich our heritage and our repertoire, which is, again, if you get a note like that from the Tsar, that's a good thing, right? That'll encourage you.
Good.
So
yeah.
So that's how this and then eventually the whole when the revolution of so-called revolution of 1905 occurred, that was one of the kind of points of the revolution, that when they settled those things, was to eliminate that whole censorship system. So that became no longer.
But then they also started just eliminating Christianity as well. So,
well, that's after the 1917 revolution. Yeah. The 1905
okay.
revolution. It was kind of an attempt at democratization, attempt to get a representative like a parliament, to move towards constitutional monarchy, which didn't actually happen, but they did get a parliament. And other reforms, smaller reforms were made in the code of laws and stuff like that. So a little bit of liberalization there.
Not nearly as drastic as the 17.
Yeah, well, that was there were of course two
Totally
revolutions
different.
in 1917, one in February, one in October, and the February Revolution was again a major attempt to democratize, and of course the Tsar abdicated the throne at that point, and Russia at that point showed that it really had no idea of what a democracy looked like, and so it was very easy for Lenin and his cohorts to come in and overthrow that what's called the provisional government in mid 1917, and Lenin was very well financed by certain powers from the West. Yeah, so that's another whole story. A very sad
Yeah.
story because of how it affected the lives of not only Orthodox believers but certainly Orthodox believers, because that was it was a nihilistic, atheistic worldview that from the very first days of the revolution declared war on the church.
Well, speaking of something not so tremendously sad, you're talking about the Imperial Chapel.
Yes.
This is the common chant, right? This is the
Yes.
terms that people use gets really confusing. So when they talk about Obicode chant versus Kievan chant, you were saying they're sort of synonymous, but I guess what people in America mean by Obicode is a form of simplified Kievan chant that was the common chant at the Imperial Chapel. Is that
Exactly.
okay?
Yes. And we
So I've got that correct now.
yeah, I one of the hats I wear is I'm a music editor for the OCA, Orthodox Church in America Department of Music, and lately, I mean, under the work that I do, we have taken to calling, we don't say obichod, we don't say common chant, because what's common in, let's say, Moscow is not common in St. Petersburg, is not common in Kiev, it's not common, there's different regional variants. So we very clearly identify it as a Russian imperial court chant. That's the so-called obichod. And you can take a setting of, let's say, some hymn in that chant and in Kievan chant, and you'll see the very similar structures there.
Kievan is more based on Xenomany, even though it's also simplified, but it's like a simplified Xenomany that's been harmonized.
Yeah, again, one has to be careful because in Russian chant, when one is broadly speaking, one has to recognize that there are these two very distinct periods: pre 1660s or thereabouts, and post that time, post like 18th, 19th century. They're just totally like night and day. So people often ask, well, what are the eight tones in today's modern American context? I think that's what probably will be of the most interest to like your listeners. It has practically no connection and no relationship to the kind of Znameni chant that was sung pre-schism times, and it's still sung by the old believers, as we discussed last time.
Right.
Yes, you can draw some derivation. So Kievan chant was out of this kind of ferial weekday Znameni, recitative style chant. But again, you'd have to do some musicological and analytical sleuthing in order to show those relationships. The fact of the matter is that most of the singers who were recruited to the Imperial Chapel were originally recruited from Ukraine. And in Ukraine, already there was this tradition established of Kievan chant. They simply brought it to St. Petersburg. And then as things would initially perhaps just singing orally without written notation. And of course, when that happens, there's a tendency sometimes to simplify, to alter certain things, and all that was the case until the 1840s, when Nicholas I, Emperor Nicholas I, said, "I want." My chapel is famous throughout Europe. I want to have the same kind of singing throughout the realm, as far away as Alaska, okay, and as far west as Finland. I want the whole realm to sing like my imperial chapel. And he asked his choir master, Alexei Lvov, to make that happen. And Lvov, being an obedient courtier and servant, did that with the help of some assistants. And so he took and harmonized the way that the imperial chapel sang the simple chants. Znameni chant was the furthest thing from their mind. It was probably something they didn't even know, certainly didn't sing. And so out of that comes this this thing called obichod, or common chant. But the principles, so people want to know what are the 8 tones? And the simplest answer is that in the current practice, starting with the 19th century and continuing now to the present day, the 8 tones are a set of musical phrases harmonized. So you could think of them musical chord progressions, constituting several different phrases, as few as 1, and in some cases as many as 5, but not much more than that. And these patterns then go in succession, repeat as long as a certain text requires it. You would go through the sequence. Some let's say are A, B. So you have phrase A, phrase B, phrase A, phrase B. Some are A, B, C. Phrase A, phrase B, phrase C. And then we repeat again. Phrase A, phrase B, phrase C. And then sometimes there's a special cadence phrase at the end and conclusion. And these, the harmonies are pretty much just basic Western functional harmony, tonic, dominant, subdominant, etc. With the only complication that some tones have what we might actually legitimately call a dual tonic. In other words, they may have 2 different gravitational points, as it were, that one could consider. You can't really decide this is a tonic or this is the tonic, so you just have to say, well, there's a dual tonic.
A little Prokofiev action.
Yeah, perhaps. And in terms of any kind of affect or emotion, you have some that maybe minor triads predominate. In others, major triads predominate. There's a fairly extensive use of the dominant 7th chord, but there isn't really the kind of, I think, particularly people who are coming from a Western tradition and say, well, are we talking about major here? Are we talking about, major, joyful, happy, versus minor, which is, sad.
Yeah, they're more melodic formula than they are than they are scales.
Right. Well, it's a chordal pattern. It's a chordal formula. And there's very little any opportunity for any type of expressive treatment of the text. You just don't. You simply You simply find where a certain phrase is headed, where there might be an inflection point, and that's where where the recitative stops, or there might be a few notes at the beginning, recitative, cadence. Again, the next phrase at the beginning, recitative, cadence, and so that is how this vast percentage of texts are rendered
and you
in
love all of this,
current
right? This
practice.
is your favorite type of chant. You think every church should do only this type of chant.
No, I don't. I don't. I think it's in modern terms we would say it's a tremendous dumbing down of the potential of that certainly was, I believe, the original aesthetic, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
the aesthetic system that grew out of Byzantine chant through the centuries into Znameni chant, where you had not that Znameni chant is more affective, okay, in that sense. It's not, again, happy or sad or major or minor. As we mentioned, there's one scale in Znameni chant. But in terms of the relationship of the text, in terms of what we might say, expressively rendering the text through melodic means, the current system is very much a pale shadow of what I think the original intent of the founders was.
So
I recently,
in your ideal, would it be a combination then of like all the stuff that should be in the tones would be in monophonic Znameni chant and mixed with high choral Russian anthems and literature? I'm just in a hypothetical,
yeah, I
your
think,
ideal
yeah,
church aesthetic.
I think that I think a return to monophonic chant is not realistic for today, for today's day and age, so to speak. I think we're too accustomed to harmonic sounds of what sounds like church. Well, in the Greek tradition, for example, in Greek archdiocese churches, there's more of an argument perhaps to be made for monophonic Byzantine chant in the 8 modes or 12 or however many there's when you count them all up, there's more than 8 actually. Some would disagree and say even that uh, aesthetic is too much in grounded in the Middle East than let's say Western music. For a typical Western congregation, maybe 90% of whom are converts from some other uh, form of Christianity or from nothing. The famous nuns, NONEs.
Yeah, I hate
Who,
that term because I'm like, are you talking about monastics or what are you talking about?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're all nuns here. Um, so that's a real question, and I don't think that anything that I or any of my colleagues we might venture an opinion, but I don't think that that's something that bears real weight. The church in
That's fine.
America,
I mean, you can.
yeah,
I mean, my ideal church aesthetic will never happen. So you know what I mean. So
right, yeah.
it's
I'm thinking, yeah, but I do believe that the texts of Orthodox worship are so rich and so varied, just full of uh, content and meaning that to on certain, especially on certain specific occasions, festal occasions, that there is some room for something akin to Znameni chant, where we have this in the liturgical books. We have this term called idiomelon, idiomatic melody, which
mm,
means a melody that belongs to that text and no other text. So it's, you hear the melody, you hear the text. the two are matched pair. You hear one, you immediately think of the other. Well, we sing idiomela to common Russian imperial court chapel chant, which makes them anything but idiomelodic. Okay.
I see.
There's another whole realm of the category of chants called prosomia or podobny, meaning model melodies. So these are more melodic, primarily melodies that have come out of various monasteries. And again, there's a rich repertoire of singing like verses to specific saints or specific feasts to these pattern or model melodies. And there again, you get associational factors, like you'll have a hymn, the prototype, say, is to Saints Peter and Paul, apostles. Well, if you have a feast of another apostle, the hymnographers would say, to the melody, to the model, with what crowns of glory, which is immediately brings to mind Peter and Paul, apostles, and you have all these fascinating musical associations. Well, that again, that was totally a tradition that was lost in pre-revolutionary Russia, except in some monasteries. Growing up as a kid, going to church in Los Angeles, which had a very fine choir by choral standards, I never heard a single model melody. Now we're finally starting to rediscover these model melodies. Professor Gardner, whom we mentioned, the musicologist, wrote an article called "The Forgotten Treasures," singing to the model melodies. And so, people have been reading these things, some of my friends and colleagues, and they're gradually rediscovering these things. So in America, I think we have both an advantage and a disadvantage in the sense we don't have a central government or a central directorate of liturgical music like they did in Imperial Russia, the arbiter, and so on the other hand, we have this sort of anarchy and chaos. You have parishes that sing Byzantines, parishes that sing Slavic. In the Antiochian archdiocese, they have a mixture of Byzantine and Slavic because there were the early founding churches of, the Bishop Raphael of Brooklyn, who is considered a saint now in the church. He was an Arab trained in Russia and served here in America to congregations of both Slavs and Arabs. And so the Antiochians have kind of internalized a lot of some of the second-rate repertoire from the 19th century. I say, there's stuff they sing in the Antiochian tradition that they don't even sing in Russia anymore because it's been kind of like discarded as second or third-rate music. But here in Antiochian, you'll hear some of those hymns still sung. And so, yeah, in my ideal scheme, we wouldn't sing some of those second and third-rate composers. We would model after people like Costysky and perhaps Shvedov, who was another Moscow Synodal School composer, who somehow managed to use melodic elements from Znameny chant in, for example, his composition of the Divine Liturgy, not because that was a harmonization of an actual chant, but he was simply using it as thematic material, and it's beautiful, rich thematic material for a composer who knows what to do with it to bring this material somehow into use. So we would sing pattern melodies wherever possible. We would perhaps harmonize Znameny chant, which again Kostysky and Nikolsky and Chesnakov all did. They have.
Okay, that's what I was about to ask about. What about
they have,
doing 4-part of those Znameny melodies?
Yeah, and it can be done again better or with greater skill or lesser skill. Back in the late 17th and early 18th century, there was a whole repertoire which is totally lost now. It's 4-part harmonizations of Znameni chant, and it's done kind of with a chant melody in the tenor. You know that from we know that from early Gregorian-based polyphony, right? The chant is in the tenor, and they would harmonize this stuff, but it was kind of, and it's all root position triads. There's only so far you can you can get on that. But Kostysky and composers like that was one of his great accomplishments, is that he showed that there's many different ways of kind of a melodic counterpoint that can be, it can be homorhythmic counterpoint, but it's still counterpoint. It's not just stock harmonization, kind of like
The
textbook
Anglicans had this
harmonization.
a little bit. Like Charles Winford Douglas, the main editor of the 1940 hymnal.
Yes.
He has like the St. Dunstan's Kyriel, where he took a bunch of Gregorian chant and then said it with really nice 4-part harmony, so that it was meant to be sung in an Anglican context in English. I don't know if you saw any of my it was like my second interview I've done. It's with a friend of mine, Andrew Dittman.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I just saw the ones that you sent me.
Oh yeah, so he's in the style of Charles Winford Douglas. He's done the same thing and has now written, I don't think it's really produced, but it's ready to be produced, if he can find someone to help him, fund it.
Yeah,
it's all done. Is he's created his own Kyriel in the style of Charles Winford Douglas, but he's taken 9 Gregorian chant masses, like the Orbis Facto and the Cum Jubilo and the Concupitor Gentens masses, and he's set all of the Gregorian chants in 4-part harmony, and it's gorgeous. I mean, I've heard his church choir do some of them, and it's, to me, it's like, this is what a legitimate Western Rite Orthodox should be singing, because this is so tied to traditional Western chant, but in an a cappella 4-part, aesthetically pleasing sort of way. And so I would imagine the same would be possible with Znameni chant.
Yes. It has been two interesting things about that. That Charles Winford Douglas also was the first to make an English adaptation of Rachmaninoff's Vigil. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
it was done in the 1930s, I believe, and it's called Songs of the Church. You'd never know that it's Rachmaninoff's Vigil, but if you look up Songs of the Church by Rachmaninoff, it's his Vigil, adapted to a rather kind of high church Anglican. I don't know which common book of common prayer version it is, but it's a kind of a period. It strikes it as being a little period English. But the other thing is that there's a composer. I mean, one of these composers who are writing for the church these days he's actually a metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church, Jonathan Yeletsky, and he wrote a liturgy on Gregorian themes. And we actually sing a few of his pieces in our church choir, adapted to English, of course. But
wow.
There's a
I'll
whole.
have to send you a copy of this Kyriel, and you can tell me what you think.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. And if you look, I wonder if you look at it's called the Liturgy of Peace, Liturgia Mira, our Metropolitan Jonathan. I think it's somewhere. If I find it on YouTube or someplace, I'll send you there, because we actually had a recording of it that we sold for a while in the days when there were physical recordings. I still have a shelf of them.
Nobody's buying it. It's very frustrating. I bought like 500 copies of my CD to sell, and it's like I've sold like 50. And people are like, CD player? I don't have a CD player anymore.
That's right. Yep.
Speaking of the harmony of the chant, you had sent me how do you say Strochnoi chant?
Strochnoi chant.
Strochnoi chant. And so Strochnoi chant was it sounds like it's Georgian, although I'm sure both Russians and Georgians would hate me saying that it sounds like Georgians. But it has that sort of, everything is chordal, but it's polyphonic, not following any of the rules
right
that you would find in like Palestrina.
It's three-part polyphonic. I hesitate to say harmony. It's not really harmony as we understand it, unless we redefine harmony as being based on superimposition of fourth and fifth, which of course, as opposed to major third, minor third, or vice versa. So you get a considerable amount of dissonance, but it's not even clear. It seems to me, and I think scholars who are studying that music, they would say that the foundational principle is that of linearity and horizontal thinking, and what happens vertically is somewhat episodic. In other words, it's not carefully calculated as a composer says, well, I'm going to write this triad on this chord tone or this melodic tone, and I'm going to write that type of, like species counterpoint. So it's a totally different way.
Well, even the early polyphony, I guess you could say, is that way, right? Because if you're listening like Tallis, they have punto intenso contra remiso or something like that, where in one voice you'll have an E and then another voice you'll have an E flat. And so they have these like flat nines that totally don't work. And it sounds weird, today, but it's because they're thinking horizontally.
Yeah, exactly.
They're thinking contrapuntal. And it wasn't really until we got to, figured bass, where vertical thinking, even for polyphony, sort of becoming paramount, or at least that's my understanding of it. I could be totally wrong.
Right. And for some of these, I mean, again, the question of origins is somehow, and especially in the Soviet days, it was a question of nationalist pride. Like we Russians, we are different and better than all the other cultures and nationalities. And so of course this was invented by indigenously by Russians. There could be no possible influence from anywhere else, whereas in fact Gardner in particular talks a lot about this, that at even going back as far as Kiev and Rus, even as far back as Prince Vladimir and his immediate descendants, there were just countless connections, cross-cultural connections with Western Europe, Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, and all kinds of intermarriages between princes and kings and all of that. And you can imagine that all of these courtly personages had a court with them, which included musicians, and it probably included some singers. And so it's not by any means far-fetched that, because you go back to even early polyphony, organum, Machaut, Dufay, all the, you have that kind of linear thinking that predates kind of the development of what we identify as Palestrinian style or counterpoint, or later on species counterpoint, harmony, functional harmony, all of that. There's a kind of a continuum. So, but standing on its own merits, this Russian polyphony, however it came to be, was very clearly cultivated, at least in the centers, in the cathedrals of Moscow, Novgorod. St. Petersburg didn't exist, of course, then. And Kiev was under the Polish-Lithuanians by then. But in Moscow and some of the surrounding cathedrals, there was this cultivation, because they've actually dug up manuscripts and mentions in manuscripts that, this, on the right side, the choir sings the Strochnoi chant. On the left side, the choir sings, Demestveny, which was a four-part. That's the four-part polyphony, which is similar but not identical to Strochnoi. So. So this is again and what's really fascinating is that at a certain stage, when scholars first looked at these pneumatic scores, because they're written in neumes, right? There's no absolute certainty of either pitch or duration. But they said it's impossible, it's inconceivable to even think that you have three voices that are actually sung simultaneously. That they must be like three different versions of renditions, melodic renditions of the chant. Well, come to find out that in that transitional period from the 17th to the early 18th century, when staff notation already became the norm, they would transcribe. There are manuscripts that transcribe the indigenous Russian polyphony in staff notation. So there is no ambiguity anymore that somehow these voices didn't belong together or they couldn't have possibly been singing in parallel seconds. There it is. It's written in staff notation for everyone to see.
So they have
and
it.
So it's an interesting, yeah. I have a colleague in Elena Chernova in University of Heidelberg. She's a Russian living in Germany,
nice.
who just is about to defend her dissertation on this polyphony, and she actually took one of the manuscripts of the all night vigil, which is housed in the British Museum, which people had described but never actually studied or transcribed. And she's got transcription of the whole thing, into modern notation with annotations and all the scholarly apparatus, and collated it with different manuscripts in Russia. It's a very, very thorough study. I was one of her readers, so I'm
What's her name?
Familiar. Yelena Chernova.
Okay.
Yelena Chernova. Yeah, and so she's saying, along with some of her colleagues in Russia, she's kind of advancing the scholarship and the legitimacy, if you will, of this polyphony, that it's a real thing, and it's just another aspect of music, kind of a realm that we have not entirely discovered yet in here in the West.
Now, did Tchaikovsky know it? Because when he was going back and reviving Znameni, did any of these composers of the 19th and 20th centuries have any sort of understanding or exposure to Strauss chant?
Yeah, very, very dimly, if at all. And like they literally had no idea. There was a musicologist by the name of Vladimir Odoyevsky and Dmitry Rozumovsky, who's related to the famous Rozumovsky of quartet fame. But he was actually a priest of the Orthodox Church and a professor at the Moscow Conservatory. They created a cathedra, a chair for him, of early Russian music, of early Russian chant. And this was in the 1870s. So he had some inkling, both Odoyevsky and Razumovsky. They looked at these, and they were among the ones that said, well, it looks like there's three voices here going on, but from what we can figure out, it's impossible to even conceive that they were good 19th century, steeped in the 19th century consonant musical style, and to say this was what we sang, impossible, not possible that this was polyphony, and things kind of, there's a whole kind of historiography of this, how scholars kind of at various times tackled this phenomenon and what they said about it and what they wrote about it. And then, of course, during the Soviet period, there was this period of neglect, if you will, just when people just didn't even study this, and then a bit and some resurgence now in the post-Soviet period. So more to come. There's
now what about?
I was going to say there's a group. There was a group called the Kronos Ensemble also that I should mention. Kronos. It's not like the quartet. It's CHR Onos, I believe, Kronos, led
I
by
think I saw them because I was looking up Stretchnoi on
yeah.
Spotify.
Yevgeny Skurat is the director of that. And they have sung some of this polyphony also, so you can hear like good, and of course it was not sung by large ensembles. At most, 5 singers singing. Like
Okay.
Demosthenes would have been sung by 5 singers with one on each part and 2 singers on the uh, what was called the put, or the way. Uh, but Yelena Chernova is very emphatic that this is not to be confused with cantus firmus, even though it sounds like a little bit like cantus firmus. We have a chant, the cantus firmus, and then we build polyphony around it. Well, again, there's one way that it was done in the West and a different way that it found its manifestation in the East. So we want to keep
Okay.
those terminologies distinct.
And with these transnational influences, do you have any insight or thought about, for example, Tallis? So supposedly Tallis has his own octoecho system,
Hmm.
and I've done
That,
like
that
one hymn in his like sixth mode one time because I was like, this is crazy. But yeah, he like wrote a series of melodic formula,
huh,
like that was
interesting.
fully harmonized, and that was like a full 8 modes. He had like a full octoecho system.
Interesting. Well, I must admit I know relatively little. I mean, of course, I know of Thomas Tallis, and I know some of his motets and things and anthems, but I don't know about his and yeah, the 8 tones. Of course, I mean the 8 tones are part of the Gregorian system, right? So the concept is there, but here's the thing, that in liturgically speaking, you can have uh, a hymn in a service book that has a designation of a tone. Now, the argument, the logical conclusion would be that that's meant to be sung to in a particular way, to a particular melody or a particular chant or particular sequence of chords, if you will, if you're thinking 19th century Russian imperial style. Uh, but it stands alone there um, in the liturgical book, and it doesn't tell us necessarily anything about how it was rendered musically, right? I mean, the assumption is there, but it takes further investigation to put that together. And the fact that somebody like Thomas Tallis and perhaps others before him or after him would have the focus is so much on big pieces, the masses,
Right.
the requiems, and yet for a church musician, it's that octoechos that is the kind of the bread and butter. That's the real meat. Sorry, I'm mixing
Right.
my food metaphors here, but that's the real meat of a service is uh, at least in the East. There was some discussion just on Facebook about that in the Roman Rite, for example, there isn't that same emphasis. There's more emphasis on uh, the unchanging elements, even in a daily cycle. Less on
Right.
saints of the day. In the East, that's still very much the focus is on the saints of the day, on those model melodies that we talked about. Uh, so yeah, 8 tones. That's
Yeah.
very
I don't
interesting.
know
Eight
how
tones.
I don't know how he
Yeah,
used it. I know there's a few texts that are set to it, and I think there are some hymns that are derived from
yeah.
it that have found their way into English hymnals. And but I don't know exactly if he was taking specific texts and setting them, but it was sort of like Anglican chant in a way. But in a
Hmm.
similar way, that's kind of what like some of these, Kievan chant,
Yeah,
like octoechos tones,
right.
the
It's a it's a
Lord, I call
it's
up
a
on thee, hear me.
right. It's a chord
Like
progression.
Anglican chant.
Yeah. Very simple melody with some kind of what amounts to a chord progression, or depending on the functionality, one might say chord succession. Without necessarily that kind of tonic dominant driven uh, progression, if you will.
Right.
And of course, there have been countless since Mr. Lvov's efforts that were published in 1848. There have been at least half a dozen, maybe closer to a dozen attempts to reharmonize those very simple chants in the 8 tones, and to basically unseat Lvov from his position, and then Bakhmetyev, who was his successor, and just came out with a new edition in 1869, I believe, of the Obichod. They're still enthroned. Everybody who tried, Arkhangelsky tried, Kostaisky tried, Alimanov tried. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. There was a composer in this country, it was an emigre, Boris Liturgical. They all wrote their versions
I've seen those.
of chant. And a lot of times when people say Kievan chant, they mean Liturgical, because Liturgical is the one that harmonized in 4 parts the Kievan chant. Okay, that's great if you have a 4-part choir, but if you don't have all 4 parts, Liturgical's harmonizations don't work, because
now. What about the Alaskan? Do you know about the Alaskan tones that like are their own tones that nobody else sings except this tiny little place in Alaska that has their own octoecho system?
No, chances are that they can be traced very much to. Now, here's an interesting kind of ethnomusicological moment, if you will, that they may have preserved what was brought in the early 19th century, because remember the original mission to Alaska was in 1794, and there was a small group of monks that eventually, some of them died, some of them went back to Russia. Only Herman, the monk Herman, remained. Saint Herman, as we know him now. And then, but eventually, throughout the 19th century, there were other missionaries that came, and they established at one point there was something like 90 Orthodox communities throughout Alaska. Somebody, and they all sang in Slavonic, and they sang in the native languages, which were translated by Bishop Innocent Veniaminov, who eventually became the Metropolitan of Moscow. A real Renaissance man, just incredible scholar, scientist, inventor, linguist. I mean, he's just an amazing person. And one of his accomplishments was to translate the services and the scriptures into the native Alaskan languages. They didn't seek to impose Slavonic on everybody, but if you go to and connect with some of the old timers in these villages, some of the elders, they know a Slavonic version and the native version. And the current bishop of Alaska, Archbishop Alexei, is very much dedicated to preserving whatever of these heritages of these other languages, that so that they at least aren't lost, but are cultivated and encouraged, along with. I mean, there's some. Alaska is its own story. What Protestant missionaries did there was a very sad story of how they tried to de-orthodoxize the Orthodox natives, and really mistreated them in a very very dreadful way. But again, that's history, and the church, to the extent that it survives now, preserves whatever was taught to them, but again, one has to say where it was probably predating the publication of the Obichod, of whether it be 1848 or 1869. And so what is known as Alaskan chant, if somebody came from the lower 48 and brought, like the music that we publish with the Orthodox Church in America Department of Music, let's say, well, this is not how we sing this tone. Well, ours is Alaskan. But when you dig a little deeper, it's really Kievan, as was sung by the monks who came in, whether it was 1794 or shortly thereafter. So yes, it's
Okay.
the history
Well,
of
but I'm sure some influences from the music of the native Alaskans. I mean, it would sort of be inevitable at some point, I would think.
Right, of course, of course. And the question is, in it simply from a scholarly standpoint, is how much of that music is known of the native, what like native, are we talking about native uh, ritual chants, sort of, I, pagan chants, if you will, or are there folk songs, carols? How much of that do we know? We know they sing Orthodox carols, which are primarily Ukrainian carols, because
Interesting.
that was the real kind of source of so many Orthodox carols are Ukrainian. Some of them are Polish, because remember there's a connection with Poland and Ukraine that was very
I have to
strong. In
ask
fact, yeah,
before I forget with the Polish. You're talking about this whole like this is 1700s, late 1600s. Bach writes that he prefers that his musicians be well versed in the German style, the French style, the Italian style, and the Polish style.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I have yet to like I asked a bunch of people in Germany this, I've asked a bunch of scholars this, but I basically ask anyone that might have any insight. Is there any sort of insight that you might have as to what the Polish style would have been?
Well, I can only say that Poland was certainly considered, a major, uh, Catholic kingdom
Hmm.
in let's say the 1700s or late 1600s. I know that I mean the only name that comes to mind right now, but I know he's not the only one, but is Milchevsky. Milchevsky was a like a Baroque period composer, and there's a composer by the name of Nikolai Diletsky who was trained in Poland and Lithuania, but he is well known because in about 1680 or so, 1680s, he wrote a very influential musical treatise called The Idea of Musical Grammar,
Okay.
Musicistica Grammatica, which saw many editions and translations, and eventually was, uh, there are Moscow editions of it, and Kievan editions, but he was trained in Poland by some Baroque master, because his treatise is all full of Baroque concepts and Baroque aesthetic and the concertato principle and the doctrine of the affects and all that kind of stuff that is part and parcel of what we understand to be Baroque style. So what Bach meant exactly, I mean, there might be subtleties and distinctions there that it's I'm sure there are some experts in the field, but you're not talking to one of them, so I can't
Well,
say
just
more about that.
knowing that you know some from the Russian perspective, like Polish into Ukrainian, it's like
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know the couple of names that you just mentioned to me. So
yeah, yeah. I
although
I do
one of
know.
them sounded super vaguely familiar, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Milchevsky. I know that in the University of Illinois, where I did my graduate work, we had recordings of Polish Baroque music.
Mhm.
There were LPs in those days,
Right.
that they had Polish Baroque music. So someone and there were Musica Polonica. There was a big set of volumes on the shelf of the reference shelves
Okay.
of the library. Somebody has dug up, all kinds of Renaissance motets and masses and whatnot by Polish composers, and it's been published by the Polish Academy of Sciences.
Interesting.
Something
At
that's
some point, I'll
in
have to delve into it
yeah,
more
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. You just
I've
have
read
to,
a ton about Bach. I mean,
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot about Bach, and I went to Germany because I wanted to learn the German way of playing Bach. I visited all the big Bach organs.
yeah.
I've never heard anyone give me a satisfactory answer on what he meant by the Polish style. Because you
Right.
can think the
Well,
French style has
yeah.
like, significant notes in the gals and double dotting and stuff like this. And then you
Hmm.
can think of the forms he would have taken from the Italian style because he's
Yeah.
emulating Vivaldi and,
Right.
and all of
Right.
this. And then, of course, Germans have their own way of doing things, but it's,
Right. Well, but
the
Poland's right
Polish
next
thing's always been
door.
vague to me.
Poland's right next door, so there, of all places, probably, there would have been some kind of, well, all those places are next door to each other's. Yeah,
Right.
even in the 18th century, music traveled somehow.
Sure. Like, no, now speaking of that traveling, because this is sort of some of what we've been talking about, how Alaskans had the Russian chant, and what they probably had was, Ukrainian Kievan chant that made its way. I think with some forms of chant, the argument can be made, well, if we invoke like the conservative impulse, we want to get back to the original as much as we can, like we want to get back to original Byzantine chant, like if you're Greek, for example. But when you're talking about the modes and, you know, your argument is that all the imperial common chant is really not that great. And, in an ideal world, maybe we get rid of it or we would do Xenomany in 4 part. Who's to say that someone can't just create their own modes and then Orthodox churches just start using those melodic formula? And because didn't like Benedict Sheehan do that? Maybe it was just an experiment or something. But what would make that a great idea and what would make that a horrible idea? And or anathema.
Well, that's kind of a deep topic,
Yeah.
because in part, I think the question is, is this question of the affects. I think in the West and 21st century America, there's so much there is a tendency to in a widespread culture to somehow to relate to certain elements of music. Uh, One of them being, we don't differentiate between the affects, even as certainly not as the early chant creators did, like to think Gregorian chant and you have Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixed Lydian, Ionian, Aeolian. You have all those different modes, and then you read
Hmm.
Plato and different. We don't react the same way as Plato, for example, discusses how the modes have an effect on the listener. So
We
what
mostly don't, but I will just say, like, if I'm going into a big hymn on the organ and I do a little fanfare and it's clearly Mixolydian, there's a certain affect, And if
yeah,
it's like prayer
yeah,
time and I play Lydian, everyone's like, "Ah, that's so nice."
yeah,
So
yeah.
even though we don't really differentiate, it's
Well,
sort of intrinsic to the modes to some
so
degree.
so that's the real question in my mind, is the person or persons. I don't know if this kind of thing, we get this idea that, these heritages or these ways of dealing with music or organizing music somehow, maybe were done by some uh, anonymous committee of great saints and scholars or monks or whatever. But, more than likely they were the work of one person at some point in
Right.
time. Like St. John of Damascus is usually who was a great, polymath and mind of his time. That somehow he's given the credit for organizing the Octoechus, as
Hmm.
Pope Gregory the Great is credited with, that. What did he do? Did he actually compose the Gregorian chant? No, probably not. He or his assistants or whoever he delegated it to uh, organized some pre-existing amount of material. Um, but to say, okay, we're in 21st century America. We're now going to invent our own octoechas. Well, first of all, you'd have to agree. Okay, what basis are you going to? Are you going to use melodic basis? Are you going to use harmonic basis? Are you going to use chords and consonances and dissonances in some sort of expressive manner. And then there's a whole question of rhythm, which is so predominant in a lot of our contemporary pop music, or I'm not even mentioning classical music, because classical music seems to have kind of it's removed itself from the running of yeah, it's out there, but it's not something that people going well, you think people going to church on a given in a given place on a given day, how many of them are familiar with modern classical music and all of its various uh, trends and movements.
Right.
So where would one begin? Uh, Interestingly, I did sit in on a couple of seminars that Benedict Sheehan did that were very, very interesting, where he started with deconstructing a Znameni melody to its basic kind of skeletal outline and for a particular text. And then the following day, he reconstructed that skeleton and put like meat on the skeleton, if you will, put sinews and bones and muscles and everything like that. And it was a very interesting process, just simply from a compositional standpoint. And if you had enough people who were talented and skilled in doing that, something could come of it. But those people aren't, they're not there yet. They're not around yet. So it would have to be the work of some sole individual, and we everybody is given a different sort of assortment of talents and gifts, and something could be done in a very shall we say, uninspired and pedestrian way, or it could be done in a brilliant way that is inspired. And the church too has its own filters. You sing something new in a congregation will respond either positively or negatively, and there's a way of certain things catch on and certain things don't catch on. I had this
let's
experience.
Say, for example, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that there's this composition of the very short little Paschal hymn, "Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life." I wrote it based on some kind of thoughts I had for that I had mainly picked up singing like sacred harp tunes and pentatonic.
The Appalachian stuff.
Well, like that Appalachian stuff. Well, come to find out that some group in Russia recorded this "Christ is Risen" in English and called it Appalachian Chant. They didn't attribute it to me, not that I cared about being attributed to, but they called it Appalachian Chant because it sounded like somebody's idea. It's like Copland's Appalachian Spring. It's like they say that Copland never went farther west than the Hudson River. But he's credited for composing all of these quote unquote Western sounding, like as in Cowboys and Indians Western, Rodeo and Billy the Kid.
Well, it's like reggae. It was thought up in a studio in Nashville. But if it takes hold, it takes hold,
So it takes hold. And so this is what I'm saying, that there's a kind of filter. This Christ is risen. People send me videos of somebody singing in Kyrgyzstan, at a divine liturgy during communion. People are singing "My Christ is risen" in English, like what gives? So things eventually, given enough time, things will sort of distill themselves into something, and somebody may try to compose an octoethus, and it'll be a totally again, we have such a cross fertilization and or just simply a juxtaposition of styles in America. Byzantine. We sing some Byzantine melodies in our church, which is OCA, which is 90% converts. We sing a little Georgian, when we can. We sing Sheehan and Morrison and Sander and you know uh, and Kostisky when we can, and Gardner, and Chesnikov, although we can't really do Chesnikov justice because we don't have enough voices. If we double the size of the choir, then we could pull off. Chesnikov had, I think, 30 singers in his church choir.
Wow.
Not huge. I mean, it's not like 60 or 80 or something like that where you think.
But if you have 30 good ones,
yeah, and they were and 2/3 of them were men. So he had double bass. He had basses, first and seconds.
I love
first
the
and
basso
second
profundo
tenors.
thing.
Right. He had a couple of bassi profundi, and then he had just a few altos and women sopranos, which was not characteristic in those days because they were still using boys. The Moscow Synodal Choir, the Imperial Chapel, they used boy sopranos and altos, boy sopranos and boy altos. But Chesnikov in his church choir had women altos and sopranos. So, and that's for whom he wrote his music, by and large. So, there are. Anyway, I'm saying we have a very eclectic mix in our church, and I think that's going to be around for at least a century or two before we have an American Octoychus.
Right now, if my buddy Elias, right, or my buddy Hammy, let's say they just said, mode 7, Ledkovsky, it's not so great. I'm just gonna rewrite this one mode, for the Paschal season. I'm gonna rewrite mode 7. So 2 questions. One, would that be like a possible way that, like, if that was good and their priest didn't care and their choir sang it well, and then some other choir heard it and they adopted it, would that be a possible way that, like, there could eventually arise an American system of the octoechos? And second part of that question is, should talented composers and arrangers occasionally attempt that sort of thing, with utmost caution and whatnot? But, like, should that be a thing that, in your estimation, they should try?
I think, well, to answer the first question, yeah, I think that's not unprecedented. When I was singing with Yevgeny Ivanovich Yevbitz in Paris, he didn't like tone 7. He had his own version he had something he pulled out of his nominee, arranged it, harmonized it, and when it came to tone 7, that's what we sang. Now, do they still sing it to this day at the Paris Cathedral? I don't know. These days.
Maybe I could have told you, but I wouldn't have known. They wouldn't let me stay.
Right. The choir master is by the way, Father Alexander Kedrov, who is a descendant of the Kedrov of the Lord's Praise, his great grandson. And there was another Kedrov who was the son of who was also a composer. So anyway, so that legacy there continues. But should composers do that? Yeah, well, I think in fact. I think Benedict Sheehan did that in his liturgy that was commissioned by a parish, St. Michael's in Kentucky. That liturgy contains now that's an Antiochian parish, so they use the Byzantine 8 tones for the resurrectional hymns of the day, and I believe Benedict arranged all of those. So he didn't just steer clear of the 8 tones. So whatever comes out of something like that, and if it catches on, it may spread. It may go to other parishes. It may go to other non-Antiochian parishes, let's say. But right now, the picture in America is so complex and so varied and so and the sad fact is that we just don't have the right proportion of really well qualified, well skilled choir masters who can really even something new that's written could even attempt to sing it. That's just way beyond what we're capable of right now. So we just go week to week and we try to sing the best we can and the most prayerful and musical way that we can, and make and people seem to be, they respond to that.
I
We
think
have.
you need two things. I think you need one big influential voice at each of the seminaries that instills in all of the new seminary graduates music super matters and one should pay for it. One professor at St. Tikhon's and one professor at St. Vlad's who get, everyone graduating thinks this. And then you need like 5 ridiculously wealthy Orthodox people to start like a commission or
Who love music,
who
and
love
recognize the
music
importance of music. Yes,
to
yes. Well,
give money
that's a
to
yeah,
dioceses
yeah,
so that the biggest parishes and or cathedrals in their diocese would make that a normative practice.
yeah. Well, I mean, without a doubt, and something like that. And we have these. We can certainly point to the Moscow Synodal School, but I mean, we don't have to limit it at that, because there have been other points in times of history where you can say there's been an influential institution. Think of the Accademia Philharmonica, in Bologna, and everybody studied at some point with Padre Martini, right? You have even in the Greek Orthodox realm, you have these composers who studied. They all kind of ended up at the University of Southern California, studying with I think it was Ingolf Dahl, who's not a Orthodox composer, but they all came out of there with the notion that
Interesting.
they should recreate the Western experience of taking chant and creating polyphonic works. So you have Frank Desby, Theodore Bogdanos, Taiki Zest, the late Taiki Zest, who just passed away a few weeks ago. They all studied with this influential composition teacher who
Was that
kind of,
Dahl, you said?
I believe so, Ingolf Dahl, Dhal.
I played his saxophone concerto.
Okay, there you go.
And supposedly, if this is the right guy, Dahl was the student of Stravinsky, and Stravinsky gave him this super weird backhanded compliment of, "Oh, this is so great. This will be the best thing. This will be the best thing you've ever written."
Right. Well, it's
And
funny,
it
I mean,
was. There's like it's the only good piece
yeah.
that he
These things
wrote
are
as far as
can
the
be
concert rep is concerned.
yeah. They can be so serendipitous. I mean, just you get some group of people, and there's some other person, and that I'm sure that Professor Dahl had no idea about Byzantine chant. Just like I had occasion, I had a seminar with a great musicologist at University of Illinois, Alexander Ringer, who helped me analyze Kostalski's works and to understand how Kostalski worked. And I mean, all he had to do was look at the score. He didn't have to know anything about Znameni chant or Orthodox music or anything. He was a Jewish intellectual from Vienna, initially, but he was this, totally encyclopedic mind, a brilliant lecturer, pedagogue, musicologist in the true, with a capital M. And whatever I learned from him was later helpful in whatever I've done, but I certainly don't consider myself even a composer. I just kind of arrange things occasionally when the situation warrants it or there's some need. I'm not one of
Hey,
these
I've
people
sung your
who's
Paschal Triparian. I did not
yeah,
realize
yeah.
when we were talking that that you had written that, but I'm like 99% sure that the Appalachian one that I've sung is the one that you wrote.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah. It's the only one out there like that. Yeah, but again, it's a total composition, original
do you
composition.
like all of the the emulation of Appalachian stuff? Because I know there's one from Greenville of them doing "God
Uh,
Is With Us," an Appalachian-y style, and it has like 100,000 views or something like this. And
Yeah.
I mean, it
So
seems like there's a real hunger for it. And Olivia over at Holy Ascension, like she wrote her own, was it for Cassiani?
Right. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
I think it was either the Bridegroom Manuscript
Yeah.
or it
I'd
was
like.
I'm
I'd
pretty
love
sure
to
it was
see
the Hymn
that.
of Cassiani.
Yeah. I'd love to see that. We're on the lookout for a new version of that for our church, because the one we've been singing is, again, it's kind of a stylized Byzantine chant that I'm sure somebody like John Michael Boyer would say, well, that's not Byzantine, you know.
I'll send you
But
the one that Olivia wrote. It's
I'd
really
love to.
cool.
Yeah, I've met Olivia. I'd like to see her work. So onwards and upwards, I guess. We have work to do.
And okay, I have to ask, because you're in the OCA, you have a lot to do with the OCA music. It's very interesting to me that the Antiochian Rite has a Western Rite, and Road Corps has a Western Rite. But without fail, every priest I've ever talked to in the OCA hates the idea of the Western Rite. So, uh, what is your opinion of Western Rite Orthodoxy? 'Cause especially since you're so involved in the music, the Russian
Yeah,
tradition, the
yeah.
nominee chant.
Mm.
I mean, I would think you would probably have some antipathy towards it, but maybe
No,
not.
no, I don't. I've certainly, growing up as a music student, you end up singing in all kinds of settings and very well familiar with Western literature. I mean, that's what we're raised on, right? And
Hmm.
I've sung masses and all kinds of services in all kinds of different denominations. I don't have any antipathy towards it. I can't say that I have any particular uh, even familiarity with it. That's one experience I've not had. I have not experienced an Orthodox Western Rite service, although I maybe have seen some. There's a parish in somewhere in suburban Virginia, suburban DC, kind of out further out in the country, St. Gregory's. I'm not sure. They have a wonderful music establishment there. They have a music school. They have a like all these teenagers who have grown up, and now they have like a 30 voice choir, and they sing beautifully, uh, uh, and I think they're Western Rite. Um, so I'm as if it's done well, if it's done prayerfully, it's if it brings people to the Lord, it's and the theology isn't compromised in some major way. I think that's the real danger. Do we like Thomas Tallis's music? Sure, we love Thomas Tallis's music. Should we sing it in the Orthodox Church? If it's if it's a biblical text, if it's not going to through the music introduce some sort of non-orthodox theology, then why not? I don't see a
Yeah,
problem
you
with
could
that.
sing "If You Love Me" during the distribution of communion or something like
Sure,
that. You know.
sure. And I think there are churches that have done that, and there are probably churches where that would be totally okay, and then there are places where people would be scandalized if they found out who the composer was. They might love it
Interesting.
initially, but then they say, "Oh, well, no, that's not orthodox," you know.
Right. Yeah,
So yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
It
yeah.
kind
We
of
we
begs
we're
it's like, should orthodoxy in the West be Western Rite, or should it be, the traditions from which it's come? It raises two, like,
yeah.
what I
All
think would
those
be organic is if, and this may happen in the next 100 years, because there were preliminary talks between the ACNA with Metropolitan Jonah, so between like the conservative traditional Anglican groups and Orthodox, and of course there's a long history of that ecumenical dialogue, like back with I think it was Metropolitan Tikhon.
yeah.
Um, but
Fellowship of
I think
Saint
what
Saint Sergius and Saint Alban. Yeah, that was
but I think
definitely a
what
thing.
might happen is in the next 100 years, my unfortunate prediction is that the ACNA will split, and that when it splits, there will be a lot of conservative, more high church, Anglo Catholic, traditional minded Anglicans without a home, or they're still like loosely tied with bishops in Africa, in which case you kind of need a couple of bishops so that like a Western Rite had its own college of bishops and had its own liturgical identity. And then you could establish like communion if you had the right talks and were able to make you know, the right
Yeah,
concessions, and then there could be a more organic, legitimate Western Rite. But this is all
yeah.
speculative, of course, but
Speculative
it's
and unfortunately, as you probably know, the church structures in this country. I mean, there have been attempts, with the first it was called the Standing Conference of Canonical Orthodox Bishops. Then you had the Assembly of Bishops, and all of that is kind of becoming, there's pieces, atoms flying off in various directions. So there isn't a unified college of anything. Is well, probably one reason we don't have a music school, because it would require the assembly of canonical bishops, everybody to agree to agree on certain things and to discern certain needs uh, in a collegial way. But if everybody's pulling in
Right.
their own direction, even with so-called Slavic traditions, you've got the OCA going this way, and you've got Rokor going that way, and you've got then you've got all the other kind of splinter groups. It's unrealistic. So we want to also just simply discern what things are possible and what things we should even be concerned about, and what things we should just not even worry about, because it's not going to happen in our lifetime. So,
Well,
but I
maybe
think
the
when,
music thing could be a
yeah,
unifying, like
yeah,
the bishops who can't agree on anything else, they could say, well, we can all agree we need better music. So how about we all go in and fund some programs where we'll teach both Byzantine and Slavic and
right,
like Western music, so that people can have different things they can pull on and specialize in one area, but learn how to arrange. And I don't know,
yeah.
maybe
That
that's in the
that's
cards for the next few
yeah,
decades.
yeah. That's the assumption there is that the bishops who are in a position to make that kind of determination actually understand something and have some awareness that you know um, there's a really funny story about that. When they started singing in parts in Moscow in certain churches, like this was during the 1660s, uh, they had to, Patriarch Nikon, for all his reforms, actually was deposed because he fell out of favor with the Tsar. So he was deposed. But in order to depose a patriarch, you had to have at least two other patriarchs to do that. You can't just, unilaterally do that. So they invited the patriarch of, I think it was Antioch and Alexandria, to travel all the way to Moscow. Twice in 2 decades they made that huge, long, arduous trip. Well, anyway, while they were in Moscow during the 1660s to pronounce some kind of sentence on Patriarch Nikon, a delegation of lay people approached them and they said, "Your beatitudes, your holinesses, is it acceptable for us in the Russian church to sing in four-part harmony? Is it legal? In other words, is it permissible?" Now, you have to ask, what possible qualifications did these two patriarchs from Alexandria, one from Antioch, had? Did they ever even hear four-part polyphonic music? Was it even a thing? And yet they pronounced that, yes, we give our blessing to four-part polyphony, and the Russian church, and the rest, as they say, is history. So again, you have these kind of serendipitous situations in history that occur, and who knows? Do we have, in other words, do we have um, uh, bishops in this country who are at least acquainted, uh, with what other churches sing? There's how many jurisdictions represented in the Assembly of Bishops? There's at least a dozen. How familiar are they with each other's musical traditions if they never attend services at each other's churches, which they don't? They just don't. I mean, there's bishops who expressly forbid their clergy to participate in any kind of pan-Orthodox services geographically, locally. Not all of them, but some do. I won't name any particular regions, but there are such regions. Others just simply don't show up. So there is no occasion even for clergy to learn of each other's, musical traditions. How are they going to agree with the kind of proposal that you're suggesting? It's just not. It's
Right.
just not. It's just not real. It's just not real. And until you get that brilliant professor, I mean, we have something at least in St. Tikhon's. We have a music program, residency program. We have, two DMAs, Father Caleb and his wife Tabitha Lewis, who are have owners of DMA degrees in their respective disciplines, choral
I've
conducting
not met them yet,
vocal
but
performance.
I'm
Yeah,
hoping to talk to them sometime soon.
that's at least something. That's at least something that you have people who are in a potential place to exert over a period of time. If everything goes well with the music program, they can eventually exercise some kind of positive force for the type of evolutionary thinking, which isn't necessarily evolution. People get scared of that term, but it's not like we're evolving towards something greater and better. But in some cases, it's a return to something that was lost, something that was obscured, something that was neglected. And cultivate those things and adapt it for our um, for our situation in this day and age. We don't have the wherewithal to stand through five-hour long vigils or 3-hour long liturgies, unless you're Coptic, and they do
Or
have
Ethiopian, and
five
they're even
hour
longer than the
or
Coptic.
Ethiopian. That's what I'm saying. But the typical American doesn't do that. So if bringing back Znameni chant in its full melismatic splendor means that we're going to have 5-hour long vigils, probably not. Can a few hymns at strategically placed spots be sung in Znameni with great effect and benefit? I would certainly say yes. And in fact, we do that in our church. We sing, like we sing certain portions of or certain special hymns at certain on certain occasions in Znameni chant.
And that's how you might suggest reincorporating it into the Orthodox Church in the United States
Yeah,
would be
yeah, but you need to
select
have
hymns,
yeah, you
maybe
need to
some
have
harmonizing it, or
yeah, with some
with a
harmonizations.
drone sometimes.
Some there is a school actually out of Russia that suggests that sings Znameni chant with a drone. Other scholars have totally debunked that theory, which was advanced by a very prominent musicologist, who had his reasons for suggesting it, but it's pretty much been debunked. On the other hand, sometimes some melodies, if sung Znameni chant with a drone, it sounds pleasant, it sounds acceptable, it sounds prayerful, and some people like it. And so why not? Why not?
I think it's like they asked Daniel Barenboim, you know that the way that you play some classical music and even you play Bach isn't the performance practice. And his response was, yeah, but this is the way Chopin would have done it. So this is a performance practice.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
only interested in the performance practice from that day, there's also like how it's been received throughout history. Like, so the Handel Messiah, the Mozart edition is still has its own historical interest, So it's like, well, doing Zanamini with an Isan might not have been how they did it, but if it sounds good, it sounds good.
yeah, yeah. So those are all possibilities.
Sure. Well, it'd be great if people sang more in Zanamini chant. And where is it accessible? I mean, I know that you have your own resources, but is let's see, I wrote it down, the Orthodox Sacred Choral Reference Library. That's more of the high Russian choral stuff, right?
That's the Russian choral stuff. Yes.
But for
And
Zanamini,
we're also adding, and shortly we'll be adding a number of chant book codices that you'll be able to the square note chant books will be readily available there. And
okay.
there's a project to catalog all the melodic formulas with phrases of different lengths and different inflection patterns that can be used as a kind of cookbook for creating so many melodies.
I think I was reading your article on the Orthodox Arts Journal
Yeah,
about that, about this big.
that's yeah. It's a
the
very
database
small
project.
project. It's a very grand project, but it's very small in its realization so far.
Now, one of those things you sent to put it in alto clef, and that I was very confused by. I'm like, why would you put anything in alto clef? But
because that was convenient for the type of musical typesetting that they were doing in those days, because it located the chant squarely on the middle staff, on the middle line of the 5-line staff, and therefore you didn't have to add ledger lines above
well,
or
I mean, I
below,
understand
because
for them, but I thought my reading of it was that you were saying as you're replicating it in this database, it should be replicated into today's alto clef, which I
no,
mean, I
I
read
don't think
alto clef a little
that's,
bit, but
yeah. Yeah, I don't think, well, that's what I mean. As a preliminary, because we're working with little screenshots from the Square notebooks. But if it ever got transcribed, it would certainly make sense, and hopefully by then, by the time we're finished and ready for that, we can invoke some AI program that will simply transcribe all that stuff into, rather than somebody sitting there and inputting it all manually. So that's something in the future. My
okay.
This book, by the way, which you may be familiar with, this is
I don't have
publication
it,
of
but I've seen it.
St. Tikhon's Monastery Press, and this has my settings of the Znameni 8 tones, what are called Theotokia Dogmatica from Vespers. They're these conclusion processional hymns before gladsome light that are rather well known. And in fact, I mentioned that Kostyski and other composers, Kostyski has a magnificent polyphonization of those melodies, which I liken to, they are for Znameni chant what Bach's preludes are for, for prelude for chorale melodies. It's just
Nice.
uh, and that you can find on the choral resource, the Orthodox Choral. It's
Okay.
orthodoxchoral.org is the Orthodox Sacred Music Reference Library. There's a
Is
Russian side of
And
it
there's
and
like
an
a
English.
Podobin website. That's not your website, is it?
No, no, no. That's
Okay.
that's that's something totally else.
Hmm. Okay. I just remember Googling back in the day for Orthodox choral music stuff, and not that many resources. So I'm glad to learn of all of your resources.
Well, they're growing, hopefully.
Yeah. But with these super special melodies, is your hope that eventually you'll have sort of like a huge catalog, huge book with like all the Xenomany melodies and all the? I mean, how big of an undertaking would it be to put into English like the book of Xenomany, you know? Or is that like the
It would be,
library of
yeah,
Xenomany?
it would be a task, because you can't simply take the melodies as they are in the Slavonic square notebooks and just simply transcribe them and put them into English, putting the kind of shoehorn English text into it. You can't do that. There's lots of notes. There are lots of
Right.
notes. You could do that, and people have done that, but that's not the right way to do it. The right way is you have to decompose it, deconstruct it, and then reconstruct it with the English text.
Hmm.
And
Well,
that,
does it exist with the Slavonic, the transliteration, no English version, but the English text underneath? Because if
no,
that existed,
such
then
a
you could
thing.
basically
Yeah,
outsource,
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
hundreds of composers, and then the process of the deconstruction and reconstruction. You know what I mean?
In the next century or two.
Yeah. Oh, come on, man. You got Musica Russica. You can
Yeah,
get that
yeah,
done in a couple weeks.
right. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's having done that, I kind of know the methodology, and I mean, I kind of outline it in that article. And there's a lecture I also gave at a composition symposium about 10 years ago now, that Kurt Sander had at the at Northern Kentucky University, and I talked about the methodology of creating one of these, the Theotokia Dogmatica, how I went about it. And
Okay.
it's a process, and it requires not only time and these resources, these sort of raw material accessible resources, but it also requires somebody with um, the talent to do it properly and to not violate either the chant or the English language, or whatever language. I mean, there's a friend whom I just met not too long ago, who's in Germany, who wants to do the same thing because he's in a Swiss little Orthodox parish in Switzerland, and they sing in some services in German. So he wants to, and there are very few singers. So he says, well, if we could do Znameni in German, why not? But in order to do that, again, it's not enough to simply transcribe the Znameni melody into round notes and start plugging in syllables of a language. But if you do it properly, then all of a sudden the language comes alive, and
Sure. Well, that's why
becomes.
I'm saying it would be nice to just see the church, like the original Church Slavonic Znameni with
Yeah.
English translation, and then you have other people.
Well, look, and since you mentioned the translation, that's another huge obstacle we haven't even touched upon. But the fact that every one of these jurisdictions in the Orthodox Church, let's say the Assembly of Canonical Bishops, they all have their different translations.
And they're
Totally,
mixing
like
U's and
right,
V's and
right.
D's and
Yeah.
dimes and
Aside from that, if you want Znameni chant in English, contact the Old Believers in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I think they have something. I think they published those books. I can't imagine what a market was. I mean, they talked to me at one point about like typesetting for them, and because they were translating their whole cycle of books into English, uh, and somehow we never came to any kind of agreement on how to go about it, and they went ahead and did something else by themselves. But the fact is that they've done it, and so if you really are interested in seeing at least how does it work, check them out. I haven't checked for quite some time, but you can
okay.
look and see. Then there's the monastery in West Virginia, Holy Cross Hermitage, that sings Namani chant, and you can
Is
listen
that
to
the
some
one
of
that was
it.
like everyone loved it, but then they joined with some non-Orthodox Orthodox?
Mm,
Are they like the
no,
genuine believers or something,
no,
something like that?
I think they're Russian church outside Russia, Rokor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
I know
think
there's
they're
some big press
yeah
that's
they're
become like genuine
uh
Orthodox or whatever that
yeah
is.
yeah. I think that's St. John Ponstedt, maybe. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Oh, I think you're right.
Those things happen with such frequency that it's really impossible unless you're like really dedicated to it to keep up with
Mm-hmm.
all these uh, all these unfortunate, because it's a fracturing of the body of Christ. So you can't see it as any other way than a tragic event. Every one of these little fractures, you had Holy Transfiguration in Brookline, Massachusetts. They went off somewhere. I mean, they were translating, and they were uh, setting hymns and recordings and teaching tapes and all this kind of stuff. And then they go off. Someone, someone looked at someone cross-eyed, and they're their own kind of splinter group. And last I heard, they were trying to build a replica of the Hagia Sophia somewhere in upstate New York, much scaled down, of course. But I wonder what Andrew Gould would say about something like that. Anyway,
I don't think he'd like it.
enough about that. Enough about that, because it's just a
Yeah, it's
reality.
sad.
It's just a reality of our times. Well, but it's this has been fun and entertaining. I hope that it's enlightening to some of your listeners, and people will be motivated first, to explore further some of these some of these resources that people may not be familiar with. I would say, as we like to say, to quote, is it Bartholomew or Philip, who says to Nathaniel, "Come and see."
Yes.
So if you're interested in the Orthodox Church, come and see. You can. It's much better than reading books about it or listening to podcasts about it. It's just to come and see. And the only thing I wish I could make that invitation wholeheartedly, because you just never know what kind of singing you're going to hear when you go to a church. I wish I could say, just any church. I mean, you'll just hear magnificent singing because that's our tradition. And sadly, it's not the case. We can't make that invitation with 100% certitude of what people are going to hear. But
Or you don't know if you go to some like random Serbian parish where they're just like, "Who are you? Why are you here? We
yeah,
do not know you. Leave." You
you
know,
don't look
like
you don't look Ukrainian. You don't look Ukrainian.
I've had people at Holy Ascension tell me they've been visiting folks somewhere else and basically not been welcome into, like, barred from, after talking to the priest, barred from communion by some old lady in the parish who like didn't know who they were, so it didn't let them go up. I'm like, that's wild. So, but generally speaking, yes, I tell people to go visit the Orthodox Church, even though I'm Anglican. It's like, even if you don't convert, you should see how it's done, so you
Yeah,
have some kind of a understanding of ancient Christianity, so you can see the beauty. And this podcast is all about beauty, but I end up talking to a bunch of Orthodox people because a lot of the sort of recrudescence of beauty in modern culture is being driven by very, otherwise considered atavistic or,
yeah,
traditionalist folks, which, so, in a lot of
right.
Orthodox iconographers and people like that. So,
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I know that I learned some things. I listened to only a couple of your podcasts. I'm going to check out the rest of them and learn something about Syriac chant and other chants that I don't know much about. So more power to you.
oh, thank you very much. Yeah, and
Yeah.
thank you for coming on here.
Do you like Bach? I know you like Bach. You should buy a copy of my CD, Bach's Klavierübung Dritte Teil, at the Waltershausen Trostorgan, which you can purchase on my website, MatthewWilkinson.net. There is a link below.